biblical studies is at the heart of what we do. We prize God's Word, and teaching God's Word is just central to what we do here at the seminary. And so I see my task as just relating to the Old Testament, just bringing God's Word forth to students and instilling in them a love for God's Word, and doing what I can to encourage them to further study. And we don't look at what we do here as beginning and completing the process. We begin the process of instilling a love for God's Word into the hearts of students, and then encouraging them to further study and further ministry. Hebrew is the language in which God chose to reveal himself in the Old Testament. And I believe that God inspired the Old Testament, the Bible, to reflect his precise will down to the word, down to the letter. And so that makes it all the more important for us to understand the language in which God revealed himself. And Hebrew is just fascinating to study, and to study God's Word in the original language really brings it alive, really brings out so much that we may otherwise miss not knowing the original language. And many students have testified to that fact. Having learned Hebrew, they can now engage God's Word at a certain level that they weren't prepared to do so before. And so that's very essential and very critical to seminary training and to Old Testament studies. One of the many beautiful things about the Psalms, and that is they are so suited for the church in all countries and in all ages to be sung, because the Hebrew of the Psalter is not bound to a certain form that makes it difficult or impossible to translate into other languages. There's a freedom of form in the Psalter that lends itself to translation, so that the prophecy of the Psalms itself can be fulfilled, that all nations will sing praises to him, and that the gospel and the Psalms are meant to be spread to all nations, so that all the nations can sing to the Lord. That's one of the many beautiful things about the Psalms. And understanding the Psalms, reading them, studying them in the original Hebrew language is something that brings that element alive and really opens up the Psalter and all of the Old Testament to us. My passion is to teach students God's Word and the first fruits of God's revelation. I see the Old Testament as the first revelation of God, the most ancient portion of his Word, something that is still powerfully relevant today to the church, to all of God's people. And Old Testament doesn't necessarily mean it is old in the sense of being outdated or not applicable to our lives or to the church today. Because it is, as I said, the first fruits of God's revelation, still applicable today, still living and powerful and sharper than any two-edged sword. And it comprises over 3/4 of God's Word, and we ignore it to our own hurt. And what I want to see is students leave this place with a love for the most ancient portions of God's Word and a ready willingness to go preach it and apply it to the lives of God's people. His Word is his entrustment to us, and he has preserved his Word and given it to us down through the centuries and ages. And this ancient possession of the church, this precious entrustment, is ours now, and we must be responsible with that, teaching it and proclaiming it. And that starts here with a love for it in the hearts of students who then go out and proclaim it to others. It's foundational to understand the Old Testament. When we come to the New Testament, we're not starting with a blank slate. We understand all that God has done in the history of the church and in the lives of his people in ancient Israel. And that is just the foundation of and the footing for understanding what happens then in the New Testament with the coming of Christ and the fulfillment of everything that has been said about him.